Most men think touch is physical. They're wrong. Touch is psychological territory. It's emotional voltage. It's a transfer of state. And the first mistake most men make has nothing to do with their hands. It starts in their nervous system. Have you ever noticed how a man reaches for a woman when he isn't sure of himself? His shoulders tighten. His breathing shifts. His hand approaches like it's waiting for approval. She feels that before he even makes contact. Not consciously, not logically, but biologically. And in that subtle hesitation, something ancient inside her contracts. Because uncertainty does not feel masculine. It feels unfinished. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your touch is colored with doubt, with need, with the silent question of, "Do you like me?" she will feel that tone immediately. And attraction cannot grow inside a question. It grows inside certainty. But certainty doesn't mean force. It doesn't mean dominance in a loud theatrical sense. It means internal congruence. A man who is aligned within himself does not reach for a woman to gain something. He reaches because in that moment, touch is the most natural extension of his presence. There is no strategy in him, no performance, no internal negotiation. And that is rare. Epictetus taught that power begins with control over what is within you. Most men try to control the outcome. Few control their internal state. So let me ask you something uncomfortable. When you touch a woman, are you expressing something or are you trying to secure something? Be honest, because she knows the difference. A boy touches to escalate. A man touches to connect. A boy calculates the next move while his hand is already on her body. A man is completely absorbed in the present second. And presence is what her nervous system reads as safety. Safety. Not the kind that feels soft or submissive, the kind that feels grounded. When she is near a man who is grounded, her body does something subtle. Her breathing slows. Her shoulders soften. Her posture shifts. Not because he said the right thing, but because his internal stillness lowered her guard without effort. Seneca wrote that true strength is quiet. It does not need witnesses. It does not tremble when tested. Most men escalate through speed. They think attraction is a staircase. Hand, waist, kiss. They rush because they fear the moment will disappear. But the moment disappears because they rush. Stillness is escalation. Think about that. When you place your hand on her lower back and you stay, not hovering, not topping, not performing, and your hand rests there with calm weight, something happens. Her nervous system registers continuity. You are not flickering. You are not asking. You are there. And that there-ness begins to build psychological gravity. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the man who becomes a force simply by being fully himself. Not reactive, not approval-seeking, not fragmented. When your touch carries that kind of centered energy, she does not experience it as intrusion. She experiences it as containment. And containment is seductive. Most men fear intensity. They dilute it with jokes. They break eye contact too early. They pull their hand away first, because holding the moment feels vulnerable. But vulnerability, when rooted in strength, is not weakness. It is exposure without fear. Imagine this. You hold her hand. Not casually, not loosely, deliberately. Your thumb moves slowly across her skin, not mechanically, but attentively. You are not thinking about the next step. You are not scanning her face for approval. You are simply there. And the longer you remain fully present in that contact, the more her mind must reconcile what her body is beginning to feel. This is where attraction deepens, not in intensity, in depth. There is a difference. Intensity is loud. Depth is consuming. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live. In other words, be here. When you touch her as if the present moment is complete in itself, you send a signal that you are not trying to extract the future from her. You are inhabiting now. And women who are emotionally mature are exhausted by men who are always chasing the next second. They want to feel chosen in the moment, not pursued for the outcome. That is why certainty without agenda is the first psychological trigger. Not certainty that she will respond, certainty in yourself. The second is stillness. When your hand rests and you do not rush to move it, when your gaze holds and you do not fill the silence, when your body remains calm instead of twitching with anticipation, you create tension. But not anxious tension, magnetic tension. There is a space between stimulus and response. Epictetus said in that space lies your freedom. In attraction, in that same space lies your power. Most men close that space immediately. They joke, they escalate, they talk, because silence feels dangerous. But silence, when you are centered, becomes a mirror, and she begins to feel seen inside it. Now consider something deeper. A mature woman has been touched by men who were not present. Men who touched her while thinking about sex. Men who touched her while negotiating in their head. Men who touched her as a performance of masculinity. She felt alone in those moments. The physical contact was there, but the emotional connection was not. So what do you think happens when she encounters a man whose touch contains emotion instead of intention? Something inside her pauses, because now she is not being handled, she is being met. There is a profound psychological shift when a woman feels that a man is not trying to take her somewhere. He is simply meeting her where she is. No rush, no script, no agenda hidden behind his fingertips. And that presence, real presence, creates something words cannot: emotional gravity. You do not create gravity by pulling harder. You create gravity by becoming solid. Most men are light, reactive, easily shaken. The man who is steady, internally steady, becomes a psychological anchor. And when you touch her from that place, not to conquer, not to impress, but because in that second it feels true, she feels the difference immediately. So before we talk about specific forms of touch, you must understand this. If your internal world is chaotic, your touch will betray you. If you are seeking validation, your hand will betray you. But if you are at peace with yourself, if you do not need the outcome, if you are willing to let the moment exist without forcing it forward, then your touch becomes rare, and rarity creates value. Let me leave you with this question before we go deeper. When you imagine placing your hand on a woman you're attracted to, do you feel calm? Or do you feel tension, urgency, the need for her reaction? Your answer determines everything. Because attraction does not respond to effort, it responds to state. And the state of a man who has mastered himself is felt long before he says a word. There is a moment most men never learn to recognize. It happens after the first contact, after the hand has rested, after the eye contact has lingered, after the air between you has shifted. This is where boys rush, and men separate themselves. Because once she feels that initial certainty, she begins to test something deeper. Not you, your emotional stability. A mature woman does not simply respond to touch. She studies what happens after it. Do you pull away too quickly? Do you increase intensity because you're afraid the window will close? Do you start talking more as if you need to justify what just happened? These micro-reactions tell her more than the touch itself. Seneca wrote that fire tests gold, and adversity tests brave men. In attraction, tension tests composure. When your hand rests at her waist and she doesn't immediately respond, can you stay relaxed? When you hold her gaze and she looks away first, can you remain grounded instead of chasing her eyes? This is where most dynamics collapse, because men misinterpret neutrality as rejection, so they compensate, they escalate harder, or they retreat entirely. But here's what is actually happening beneath the surface. When she feels grounded masculine presence, her nervous system doesn't explode into desire instantly. It calibrates. Her body is asking, is this man regulated? Is he stable under uncertainty? Is his touch aligned with his state? Evolutionary psychology makes this simple. For thousands of years, a woman's survival depended on selecting a partner who was not erratic. Erratic energy meant danger. Reactive emotion meant unpredictability. And unpredictability meant risk. So when you remain steady, especially in moments of ambiguity, you are communicating something ancient. I do not collapse when the moment stretches. That communicates strength at a biological level. This is why escalation through stillness works so powerfully. Most men think escalation means more movement, more hands, more speed, more stimulation. But depth is built through sustained presence. Imagine this. You're sitting beside her. Your thigh touches hers. You don't adjust nervously. You don't comment on it. You don't move away out of politeness. You simply allow the contact to exist. Your breathing remains slow. Your posture remains open. That subtle choice creates more tension than grabbing her waist ever could. Because now her nervous system has time to register proximity. And in that registration, awareness heightens. Awareness becomes sensation. Sensation becomes anticipation. This is dopamine psychology at work. Dopamine is not released by reward alone. It spikes in anticipation, in uncertainty, in moments where something might happen but hasn't yet. When you rush, you collapse anticipation into outcome. When you remain still, you stretch anticipation, and stretched anticipation creates emotional charge. Marcus Aurelius disciplined himself to act only from clarity, not impulse. When you practice that same restraint in moments of attraction, you become unpredictable in the right way, not emotionally unstable, strategically measured, and measurement feels powerful. There is another layer most men miss: emotional congruence. If you touch her waist while internally doubting yourself, your body will communicate tension. If you place your hand on her shoulder while mentally rehearsing your next move, she will feel fragmentation. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to incongruence. Why? Because inconsistency has historically meant deception. So when your touch aligns perfectly with your breathing, your gaze, your emotional state, when everything in you says the same thing, she experiences coherence. Coherence feels safe, and safety allows desire to surface without defense. This is why emotional honesty is the third trigger. Not emotional oversharing, not dramatic confession. Honesty in sensation. If you feel admiration, let your touch carry admiration. If you feel protectiveness, let it be grounded and calm, not performative. If you feel desire, let it be slow and contained, not hungry. Desire that feels hungry triggers her defenses. Desire that feels contained triggers her curiosity. There is a profound difference. Containment says, I want you, but I am not ruled by that want. And that is intoxicating. Nietzsche spoke of the individual who has mastered his impulses rather than being mastered by them. When your touch reflects mastery rather than need, it signals something rare. You are not reacting to her beauty, you are responding from your center. That subtle difference shifts the entire dynamic. Let me ask you something deeper. Have you ever felt the urge to escalate just to prove something to yourself? To confirm she's interested, to validate your own desirability? That urge is not masculine power. It is ego seeking reassurance. And ego-driven touch always feels slightly off. She may not articulate it, but she will feel a faint pressure, and pressure disrupts attraction. The grounded man does not touch to check the temperature. He touches because the moment calls for it. And if the moment does not call for it, he waits without resentment. Waiting with calm energy is a superpower, because most men cannot do it. They interpret waiting as weakness, but waiting with calm energy says, I am not afraid of losing this. Scarcity psychology tells us that what feels unattached becomes valuable. When you do not cling to progression, you become harder to categorize. You become less predictable. And unpredictability, when paired with stability, is magnetic. There is a reason intense eye contact followed by silence feels heavier than constant verbal validation. Silence creates space, and space allows projection. When you hold her face gently, not urgently, and simply look at her for a second longer than expected, without speaking, you create a micro-suspension in time. Her mind fills that space with meaning. Meaning deepens attachment. But only if your nervous system is steady. If your hand trembles, if your breath shortens, if your eyes dart away, the spell breaks. So here is the discipline. Before you think about where to place your hands, regulate your body. Slow your breathing. Relax your jaw. Drop your shoulders. Feel your weight in your feet. Because the body of a calm man communicates more than any technique. And a mature woman does not respond to technique. She responds to regulation. When she feels that you are emotionally self-governed, she relaxes into herself. And when she relaxes into herself, attraction has room to expand. This is not about manipulation, it is about alignment. You are not trying to trigger her nervous system, you are stabilizing yours, and her system responds naturally. So the real question is not, what is the next touch? The real question is, can you hold intensity without needing to resolve it? Because in that unanswered tension, in that quiet space between movement and stillness, desire begins to form. And if you cannot remain there, you will always rush past the moment where attraction actually deepens. Now we enter the layer most men never reach. Because this is no longer about touch, it is about restraint. Attraction does not peak at escalation, it peaks at containment. The final separation between a forgettable man and an unforgettable one is this. Can you step back without losing your center? There comes a moment in every charged interaction where the energy is undeniable. She is closer, her voice is softer, her body is open. There is tension suspended in the air like a held breath. This is where impulsive men rush to claim the moment. They kiss too early, they push further than the energy requires, they try to lock in certainty. But certainty forced becomes collapse. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that desire must be governed by reason, not suppressed, governed. Because the man who cannot regulate his desire becomes predictable, and predictability kills intrigue. Here is what very few understand. The moment you prove you are overwhelmed by her, the polarity shifts. She may feel flattered, but she will not feel magnetized. Why? Because magnetism requires tension, and tension requires space. When you allow desire to exist without immediately satisfying it, you create psychological expansion. Dopamine research shows us something powerful. Anticipation stimulates more neurological activity than reward itself. It is the waiting, the almost, the unfinished that lingers. When you hug her goodbye and you hold it for just 2 seconds longer than normal, calmly, confidently, and then you release first, you implant absence. Absence is the architect of longing. Most men cling during the goodbye. Their hands hesitate to let go. Their body language asks silently, "Will I see you again?" But the grounded man releases with composure, not cold, not detached, centered. That subtle act says, "I enjoyed this, and I do not fear its ending." Scarcity framed through emotional abundance. This is where Nietzsche's concept of self-possession becomes relevant. The higher man is not controlled by desire. He chooses when to express it. When you gently cup her face, look into her eyes and pause, not speaking, not forcing, you are exposing intensity without being consumed by it. That paradox is intoxicating. She feels wanted, but she does not feel that you need her response to feel whole. And that distinction changes everything. There is another test that happens silently, after the interaction ends. Do you flood her with messages? Do you immediately seek reassurance? Do you try to recreate the moment through words? Or do you allow the echo to work for you? Separation ache is real. When a nervous system experiences connection and then a clean, confident exit, it replays the experience internally. Her mind will revisit the stillness, the eye contact, the slow touch. And because you did not overextend, the memory remains open-ended. Open loops create obsession. Closed loops create completion. Most men close every loop immediately. They explain everything. They validate everything. They over-communicate everything. The disciplined man leaves just enough unsaid, not to manipulate, but because he does not feel compelled to fill silence. Epictetus taught that freedom lies in detachment from outcomes. When you embody that in attraction, you become a rare. If she leans in, you remain steady. If she hesitates, you remain steady. If she pulls back slightly, you do not chase, because your identity is not anchored to her reaction. And this is where masculine archetype solidifies, not in dominance, not in control, but in grounded sovereignty. You are not performing masculinity, you are inhabiting it. A mature woman recognizes that immediately. She has met charming men, funny men, aggressive men, charismatic men, but she rarely meets a regulated man, a man whose nervous system is not begging, bracing, or proving. When she does, something ancient activates. Respect precedes desire, and desire anchored in respect endures. So when you touch her waist and gently draw her closer, you are not demanding proximity, you are inviting it. If she accepts, you deepen. If she doesn't, you release without ego flare. That lack of reactivity communicates strength more than any bold move ever could. Seneca wrote that the greatest power is mastery over oneself. In attraction, this is literal. When your hands, your breathing, your pacing, your silence all answer to you, your presence becomes coherent, and coherence feels powerful. Let me leave you with the final question that separates levels of men. When you walk away from a moment charged with potential, do you feel anxious or fulfilled? The anxious man rushes because he fears loss. The fulfilled man moves deliberately because he trusts himself. Trust is magnetic. Not trust in her, trust in yourself. When you internalize this, something shifts permanently. You stop asking, "How do I make her feel something?" and start asking, "Am I fully present in this second?" Because when you are, your touch stops being technique. It becomes transmission. Transmission of calm, transmission of certainty, transmission of contained desire. And a woman may forget your exact words, but she will not forget how regulated she felt in your arms. She will not forget the stillness. She will not forget the moment you held intensity without breaking it. That is what lingers. That is what differentiates, and that is why attraction at its highest level is not about getting closer. It's about becoming solid enough that closeness feels inevitable.